Paranormal Christmas Toys, The Hefty House. A Haunting Hold Chapter 1. The Christmas craze, the snow-covered streets of Willowbrook were abuzz with excitement. Christmas was just around the corner, and the town's children had one thing on their minds: the Hefty House. Everywhere you went, you could hear the chatter. "I hope I get one," exclaimed little Lucy, her eyes wide with anticipation. "My friend in the next town over has one, and he says it's the best toy he's ever had," boasted Tommy, trying to impress his friends. Parents, too, were not immune to the allure of the Hefty House. At the local cafe, mothers and fathers discussed the toy's merits over steaming cups of cocoa. "It's supposed to be educational," said Mrs. Thompson. "Teaches children about family values and responsibilities." Mr. Davis nodded in agreement. "I've heard it's a unisex toy, great for both boys and girls." "It's about time we had something like this." As the town reveled in the festive spirit, a large, unmarked truck pulled up outside Jenkins' Toy Emporium. The driver, a tall man with a shadowed face, didn't speak a word as he began unloading boxes labeled Hefty House. Mr. Jenkins, the store owner, approached the truck, a list in hand. "I don't remember ordering this many," he mumbled to himself, comparing the shipment to his records. But business was business, and he wasn't one to turn away stock, especially not during the Christmas rush. As the last box was carried into the store, Mr. Jenkins decided to open one, eager to see the toy that had the whole town talking. The box was heavier than he expected, and as he sliced through the tape with his pocket knife, a gust of icy wind blew through the store, extinguishing the lights momentarily. Blinking in surprise, Mr. Jenkins continued to unpack the Hefty House. It was a marvel, intricately designed and beautifully crafted. But as he set up the character dolls, Patty Permissions, Father Frankly, Timmy Tells, and Linda Lies, he felt an inexplicable sense of dread. The dolls' eyes seemed to follow him, their expressions eerily lifelike. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, he placed the Hefty House on display in the store window. Almost immediately, a crowd gathered outside, faces pressed against the glass, eyes filled with wonder and desire. But as night fell and the streets of Willowbrook emptied, the Hefty House stood in the dim light of the store, its windows like dark, watchful eyes. And if one were to listen closely, they might hear the faintest whisper, a chilling promise of the terror to come. "Welcome to Hefty House," it seemed to say. "You'll never want to leave." Chapter 2. The first unboxing. The Johnsons' living room was a festive explosion of red and green, with twinkling fairy lights casting a warm glow over piles of wrapped presents. The scent of pine and freshly baked cookies wafted through the air. Sarah and Jake, the Johnson kids, were practically bouncing with excitement. "Can we start with the big one, please?" Sarah pleaded, her eyes fixed on a large, beautifully wrapped box with a tag that read, "To Sarah and Jake, with love." Their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, exchanged amused glances. "All right," chuckled Mr. Johnson. "But only because it's Christmas." The children eagerly tore into the wrapping paper, revealing the much-anticipated Hefty House. The box showcased vibrant images of the toy and its character dolls, promising hours of imaginative play. "Wow!" Jake exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's even better than I imagined." Sarah was equally enthralled. "Look at the dolls. They're so detailed." The parents watched with smiles as their children introduced themselves to Patty Permissions, Father Frankly, Timmy Tells, and Linda Lies. Each doll was meticulously crafted, with lifelike expressions and outfits that seemed tailor-made. Jake was particularly taken with Timmy Tells. "He looks like he knows all sorts of secrets," he whispered to Sarah, who nodded in agreement. Mrs. Johnson, observing her children's fascination, remarked, "It's just a toy, you two. Remember to play with your other gifts as well." But Sarah and Jake seemed almost entranced, their attention solely on the Hefty house. They began to role-play, with Sarah taking on the role of Patty Permissions and Jake mimicking Father Frankly. The dialogue between the dolls became increasingly intricate, as if the children were channeling stories and scenarios they'd never heard before. Mr. Johnson leaned over to his wife, whispering, "Have you noticed? They haven't looked away from that toy for over an hour." Mrs. Johnson frowned slightly. "It's just the excitement of a new toy. Remember the year Jake got that train set? He didn't let it out of his sight for days." But even she couldn't deny the odd feeling in the pit of her stomach when she noticed how the dolls seemed to be positioned. Every time she looked, Patty Permissions appeared to be watching them, her eyes eerily focused. And was it her imagination, or did Linda Lies seem to smirk ever so slightly? Shaking off the unease, Mrs. Johnson suggested, "How about we take a break and have some cookies?" Sarah and Jake didn't respond, their world seemingly reduced to the confines of the Hefty house. "Kids?" Mr. Johnson tried, a hint of concern in his voice. It took a few moments before Jake looked up, his expression distant. "Can we play a bit longer? Just until dinner?" Seeing no harm, the parents agreed, attributing their children's behavior to the magic of Christmas and the allure of a new toy. But as the evening wore on, and the shadows in the room grew longer, the Hefty house seemed to cast an even more potent spell on Sarah and Jake. The laughter and joy of Christmas morning were replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the whispered conversations between the children and their new, unsettling playmates. Chapter 3. Patty's peculiar power days turned into weeks, and the Johnson household underwent a subtle yet undeniable transformation. The once lively and spontaneous Sarah and Jake now moved with a deliberateness that was unsettling. Their days revolved around the Hefty house, and more specifically, around Patty Permissions. "Should I wear the blue sweater or the red one today?" Sarah would ask, not to her mother as she once did, but to Patty, awaiting the doll's silent response before making a choice. Jake, who used to be decisive about his meals, now placed Patty on the dining table every breakfast. "Patty, cereal or toast?" he'd inquire, his gaze fixed on the doll's unblinking eyes. Mrs. Johnson tried to dismiss these oddities as phases. "Children have active imaginations," she'd tell herself. But deep down, a nagging worry took root. The mimicry didn't stop at simple decisions. The children began to replicate the life inside the Hefty house. They'd sit in positions mirroring the dolls, hold whispered conversations mimicking the imagined dialogues between Patty, Father Frankly, Timmy Tells, and Linda Lies, and even started adopting their postures and expressions. One evening, as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were retiring to bed, they heard hushed voices coming from the children's room. Peeking through a slightly ajar door, they saw Sarah and Jake, sitting in the dim light, conversing with the Hefty house. "Patty says we should sleep at 9:30 sharp," Sarah whispered, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. Jake nodded, his movements stiff. "And we must always keep our room tidy," just like the Hefty house. The parents exchanged worried glances. This wasn't the playful imagination they were used to. This was something else, something more controlling. The final straw came one chilly evening. Mrs. Johnson called the children for dinner, but there was no response. Walking into their room, she found them standing still, staring at the Hefty house, their expressions blank. "Sarah? Jake?" she called out, a tremor in her voice. The children turned in unison, their movements synchronized and robotic. "Patty Permissions says it's not dinner time yet," Sarah intoned, her voice flat. Mr. Johnson, hearing the commotion, rushed in. Seeing his children's altered state, he felt a cold dread. "This has gone too far," he whispered to his wife. They both realized that the Hefty house, and Patty Permissions in particular, held an unnatural sway over their children. The toy that was supposed to bring joy and learning had instead brought a haunting hold over their household. Determined to get to the bottom of it, the Johnsons decided to delve deeper into the mystery of the Hefty house. Chapter 4. Father Frankly's facade. The days following the Eerie dinner incident were filled with tension in the Johnson household. Sarah and Jake's behavior grew increasingly peculiar, and their once vibrant personalities seemed to be overshadowed by the influence of the Hefty house. One morning, Mrs. Johnson found Jake meticulously arranging his shoes, lining them up in a perfect row, much like the organized interiors of the Hefty house. "Jake, why are you doing that?" she asked, puzzled. Jake looked up, his eyes distant. "Father Frankly says everything should be in its proper place," he replied matter-of-factly. Sarah, overhearing the conversation, chimed in, "Yes, Mom. Father Frankly says order and discipline are important. We're just doing as he advises." The children's constant reference to Father Frankly was unsettling. It was as if the doll had become a moral compass, guiding their every action and thought. Determined to break the toy's hold on their children, Mr. Johnson declared a new rule one evening. "From tomorrow, Hefty house playtime will be limited to 1 hour a day," he announced firmly. Sarah and Jake exchanged alarmed glances. "But Father Frankly says we need to spend more time with him to learn important life lessons," protested Jake. Mr. Johnson, trying to remain calm, replied, "Your mother and I decide the rules in this house, not a toy." That night, as the household lay in darkness, Sarah and Jake were awakened by a soft, persuasive whisper. "They don't understand," the voice murmured. "I'm only trying to help. Listen to me, and everything will be all right." The children recognized the voice instantly. It was Father Frankly. The next morning, the Johnsons found the Hefty house placed prominently in the living room, with Father Frankly sitting on a tiny throne-like chair inside. Sarah and Jake were already engrossed in play, their faces serious. "Didn't we say only 1 hour of playtime?" Mrs. Johnson reminded, trying to keep her voice steady. Sarah looked up, her eyes cold. "Father Frankly explained it to us. He said you're trying to keep us from learning and growing. He's teaching us important things, things you won't." Mr. Johnson, taken aback, replied, "He's just a toy, Sarah. He can't teach you anything real." Jake, mimicking the authoritative tone of Father Frankly, retorted, "He knows more than you think. He's been around for a long time." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, the tension palpable. The parents felt an increasing sense of helplessness, watching their children slip further under the toy's influence. Days turned into a blur. with Sarah and Jake spending every waking moment with the Hefty house, often whispering and conferring with Father frankly. The once joyful sounds of laughter and play were replaced by hushed conversations and the eerie silence of complete absorption. One evening, as Mrs. Johnson was preparing dinner, she overheard Jake's voice, filled with genuine curiosity. "Father frankly, why don't they understand? Why won't they let us be with you?" The soft, persuasive whisper of Father frankly responded, "They're afraid, Jake. Afraid of what they don't understand. But don't worry, I'll always be here for you." Mrs. Johnson, her heart pounding, realized the depth of the situation. The Hefty house wasn't just a toy. It was a force, a presence that had ensnared her children. And at the center of it all was Father frankly, with his soothing voice and manipulative words. Determined to reclaim their children from the toy's clutches, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson decided on a drastic measure. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. Father frankly's facade of wisdom and guidance had deeply embedded itself in Sarah and Jake's minds, and breaking that hold would require more than just parental authority. It would require uncovering the truth behind the Hefty house and its mysterious inhabitants. Chapter 5. Timmy's Tattletales. The Hefty house's influence on Sarah and Jake was no longer confined to the walls of their home. Even outside, their behavior became increasingly erratic. At school, they began isolating themselves from their friends, often whispering among themselves and casting suspicious glances at their peers. One day, during recess, Sarah approached her best friend, Emily, her face stern. "Timmy said you took my pencil yesterday," she accused. Emily, taken aback, replied, "I didn't take anything, Sarah." "Why would you think that?" Jake joined in, pointing at another classmate, and Timmy said Mark cheated on the math test. The accusations flew, creating rifts among the children. Friendships that had lasted years were suddenly strained, trust replaced by suspicion. The schoolyard, once filled with laughter and games, now echoed with arguments and tears. Mrs. Johnson, while picking up the kids from school, overheard these confrontations. She noticed other children, not just Sarah and Jake, making similar accusations, all referencing the mysterious Timmy tells. Conversations with other parents revealed a disturbing pattern. Children who owned a Hefty house were all exhibiting similar behavior, becoming tattletales and sowing discord among their friends. The toy's reach was spreading, its effects felt throughout the community. Mrs. Thompson, a neighbor and close friend of the Johnsons, shared her concerns one evening. "It's not just the tattling," she said, her voice trembling. "My son, Danny, won't do anything without consulting his Hefty house. He's become so distant." Mr. Johnson nodded in agreement. "We're seeing the same with Sarah and Jake. It's like they're in a trance." The situation escalated to the point where a community meeting was called. The town hall was packed, parents and concerned citizens filling every seat, all looking for answers to the Hefty house enigma. Mr. Davis, the town's mayor, began the meeting. "We've gathered here to discuss the phenomenon surrounding the Hefty house toy. It's clear that our children are being affected, and we need to understand why." Parents shared their experiences, painting a grim picture of the toy's influence. Tales of children's obsession, the eerie power of the character dolls, and the divisive whispers of Timmy filled the room. Mrs. Johnson took the floor, her voice filled with emotion. "Our children are being turned against each other. Friendships are breaking, trust is eroding. We need to put an end to this." A murmur of agreement spread through the hall. But the question on everyone's mind was, how? Mr. Jenkins, the owner of the toy store that sold the Hefty houses, stood up. "I never ordered these toys," he confessed. "They just arrived. And now, I can't get rid of them. Every time I try to send them back, they reappear." The room was filled with gasps of shock. The mystery of the Hefty house deepened, its origins and purpose becoming even more enigmatic. The meeting concluded with a unanimous decision to ban the toy and find a way to free the children from its grasp. But as the townspeople left the hall, there was a palpable sense of unease. The Hefty house, with its silent watchers, had cast a dark shadow over the community, and the battle to reclaim their children's innocence had only just begun. Chapter 6. Linda's labyrinth of lies. The days following the community meeting were tense. While the town had united against the Hefty house's influence, the toys' grip on the children remained unyielding. And now, a new menace emerged from the shadows of the dollhouse: Linda lies. In the Johnson household, things began to go awry. Mrs. Johnson's cherished locket, a family heirloom, went missing. She was certain she'd left it on her dresser, but now it was nowhere to be found. In its place was one of Sarah's bracelets. "Sarah!" Mrs. Johnson called out, her voice edged with frustration. "Have you been in my room again?" Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. "No, Mom. Why would I take your locket?" Jake chimed in. "Linda lies told me Sarah didn't do it." Mrs. Johnson sighed, the weight of the ongoing ordeal pressing down on her. "Then where is it?" Similar incidents began occurring throughout Willowbrook. Valuables disappeared, only to be replaced by other household items. Children were blamed, siblings turned on each other, and the once close-knit community began to unravel. At the Thompson residence, a treasured family photo was replaced by a child's drawing. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and the household was filled with anger and distrust. The Smiths found their car keys inside the refrigerator, replaced by a toy car. The Martins discovered their dog's leash tied to their front door, while the dog was nowhere to be found. It was chaos, and at the center of it all was Linda lies, her influence sowing discord and mistrust. The town's harmony, built over generations, was being eroded. Neighbors began avoiding each other. Whispered conversations replaced friendly chats, and a cloud of suspicion hung over Willowbrook. Mr. Johnson, trying to find some semblance of reason amidst the madness, called a few neighbors over one evening. "This can't go on," he declared. "We need to get to the bottom of this." Mrs. Thompson, her eyes red from crying, shared, "My children are at each other's throats. They don't trust each other anymore. It's that wretched doll, Linda lies. She's turning our homes into labyrinths of deceit." Mr. Davis, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We need to confront this head-on. These toys, these entities, they feed on our fears, our mistrust. We need to show them that we won't be broken." The group nodded in agreement. They decided to organize a town-wide event, a day of unity and trust, hoping to counteract the negative energy that Linda lies and the Hefty house were spreading. The day arrived, and the townspeople gathered in the central square. Children played games that promoted teamwork, neighbors exchanged heartfelt apologies and mended bridges, and families came together in a show of solidarity. As the sun set, a large bonfire was lit, symbolizing the town's collective spirit. One by one, families stepped forward, placing their hefty houses into the flames, watching as the toys were consumed by fire. The sight of the burning hefty houses, with their character dolls, Patty Permissions, Father Frankly, Timmy Tells, and Linda Lies, being reduced to ashes, was both terrifying and cathartic. As the last embers died down, the townspeople felt a sense of relief. The nightmare seemed to be over. But as they returned to their homes, they couldn't shake off the feeling that the battle with the hefty house was far from over. The labyrinth of lies might have been navigated, but the journey through the darkness had only just begun. Chapter 7. The hefty household. The bonfire's flames had barely cooled when the town of Willowbrook realized that their ordeal was far from over. While many had thrown their hefty houses into the fire, hoping to end the toys' malevolent influence, several families had held on to theirs, unable to part with the toy that had so completely ensnared their children. The Johnsons, having witnessed firsthand the toy's sinister power, were alarmed to see more and more children in the neighborhood falling under the hefty house's spell. Playdates and outdoor games were replaced by hushed gatherings around the dollhouse, with children lost in its intricate rooms and the tales of Patty Permissions, Father Frankly, Timmy Tells, and Linda Lies. Desperate to find a solution, a group of concerned parents, including Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, formed an alliance. Their mission was clear: uncover the origins of the hefty house and put an end to its reign of terror. Their first course of action was to investigate the toy's manufacturer. But to their astonishment, they found no trace of any company or individual responsible for its creation. The boxes bore no logos, the instruction manuals had no addresses, and even Mr. Jenkins, the toy store owner, had no recollection of ordering the toy. "It's like it appeared out of thin air," Mrs. Thompson remarked, her voice tinged with fear. The group's investigation hit a dead end until Mrs. Miller, a local librarian with a keen interest in history, brought forth a dusty old newspaper from the town archives. The headline sent chills down their spines: "Mysterious Toy Enthralls Children. Parents Beware." The article, dated several decades ago, spoke of a toy remarkably similar to the hefty house, which had appeared in Willowbrook and caused a similar frenzy among the children. The toy's influence had waned after a while, but not before causing significant distress to many families. Mrs. Miller adjusted her glasses, her voice grave. "It seems history is repeating itself. This isn't the first time our town has faced such an enigma." The group pored over the article, searching for any clues or solutions from the past that might help them in the present. They discovered a mention of an old town historian, Mr. Harold Whitman, who had researched the mysterious toy's origins back then. Determined to find answers, the group decided to pay a visit to Mr. Whitman's last known address. The house, nestled on the outskirts of Willowbrook, was old and decrepit, with ivy-covered walls and broken windows. But to their surprise, they found the elderly Mr. Whitman still residing there, his memory sharp as ever. He listened intently as the parents recounted their ordeal with the hefty house. Nodding slowly, he said, "I remember the chaos that toy caused all those years ago. But we never did find out where it came from." He paused, his eyes distant. However, there were rumors. Whispers of a cursed artifact, a toy that was said to trap the souls of children. Some believed it was created by a vengeful spirit, seeking to spread misery and discord. The room grew cold as Mr. Whitman's words sank in. The parents exchanged worried glances, realizing the gravity of the situation. "We need to find a way to break the curse," Mr. Johnson declared, determination in his voice. Mr. Whitman nodded. "The solution lies in understanding the toy's true purpose and confronting the spirit behind it. Only then can you hope to free your children from its grasp." As the group left Mr. Whitman's house, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. Armed with knowledge from the past, they were determined to unravel the mystery of the Hefty house and save their children from its haunting hold. Chapter 8. The desperate descent. The atmosphere in Willowbrook grew thick with tension and unease. The once cheerful town, known for its close-knit community and festive spirit, now felt like a place under siege. The Hefty houses, with their eerie allure, had tightened their grip on the children, drawing them deeper into their intricate rooms and the tales of their enigmatic inhabitants. Determined to rid their homes of the malevolent toy, several families attempted to dispose of the Hefty houses. Some buried them deep in their backyards, while others drove miles away to dump them in remote locations. But each time, to their horror, the Hefty houses would reappear in the children's rooms, as if mocking their futile efforts. Sarah and Jake, like many other children in the town, became increasingly distant. They would spend hours, sometimes even entire days, engrossed in the Hefty house, their voices a mere whisper, their expressions vacant. Meals went untouched, homework lay forgotten, and the joy of childhood seemed to have been snuffed out. In homes where the Hefty house resided, an oppressive atmosphere prevailed. Rooms felt colder, shadows seemed darker, and an inexplicable sense of dread permeated the air. Parents would often find themselves glancing over their shoulders, feeling as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. But the toy's influence wasn't limited to the children. Night after night, the town's adults were plagued by nightmares. Vivid, terrifying dreams where they found themselves trapped inside miniature rooms, their movements restricted, their voices silenced. They would wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of confinement lingering long after the dream had ended. Mrs. Johnson was one such victim. One night, she dreamt of being inside the Hefty house, with Patty permissions and Father frankly towering over her, their expressions twisted into malevolent grins. She tried to scream, to move, but her voice was gone, and her body felt paralyzed. Just as panic threatened to consume her, she jolted awake, her heart racing. She wasn't alone in her experiences. At the local cafe, hushed conversations revealed that many in the town had suffered similar nightmares. The sense of helplessness, the feeling of being trapped, was a recurring theme. Mr. Johnson, trying to make sense of the chaos, called another meeting of the concerned parents group. "This is bigger than we thought," he began, his voice grave. "Not only are our children under its spell, but we're also being affected. We need to find a way to fight back." Mrs. Thompson, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, shared, "I've started hearing whispers at night, voices that seem to come from the Hefty house. They speak of a curse, of a spirit seeking revenge." The group realized that to combat the Hefty house's influence, they needed to delve deeper into its origins and the spirit behind it. The rumors and tales shared by Mr. Whitman provided a starting point, but they needed more concrete information. As the meeting concluded, the parents formed smaller teams, each tasked with researching different aspects of the toy's history, its materials, and any rituals or legends associated with it. They hoped that by pooling their resources and knowledge, they could find a way to break the curse and free their children from the Hefty house's haunting hold. But time was running out. With each passing day, the children grew more distant, their personalities fading, replaced by the robotic, trance-like state induced by the Hefty house. The town of Willowbrook, once a haven of joy and community spirit, was now on a desperate descent into darkness. Chapter 9. The bonding battle. In the face of the growing menace of the Hefty house, the families of Willowbrook decided to fight back, not with anger or fear, but with love and unity. The town's elders often spoke of the power of human connection, and now, more than ever, the community needed to harness that strength. The Johnsons took the lead, organizing a weekend camping trip for several families. Away from the confines of their homes and the ever-watchful eyes of the Hefty house dolls, they hoped the children would reconnect with reality. The woods, with their vast expanse and serene beauty, seemed like the perfect escape. As tents were pitched and campfires lit, the children, though initially hesitant, slowly began to engage. The lure of roasted marshmallows, the thrill of ghost stories under the starlit sky, and the simple joy of running wild in the woods began to chip away at the Hefty house's hold. Sarah and Jake, who had been among the most affected, showed the first signs of improvement. Sarah laughed for the first time in weeks as she chased fireflies, and Jake's eyes sparkled with mischief as he planned a prank on the adults. Across town, other families initiated their own bonding activities. The Thompsons organized board game nights, where laughter and friendly competition replaced the hushed whispers of the Hefty house. The Martins started a tradition of storytelling evenings, where each member shared tales of their childhood, bridging the gap between generations. The community's efforts seemed to be working. The children, once lost in the dollhouse's intricate tales, were slowly returning to the real world, their personalities shining through once more. However, this resurgence of human spirit did not go unnoticed by the Hefty house. The character dolls, sensing the weakening of their grip, became more aggressive. Patty Permission's voice grew shriller, her demands more unreasonable. Father Frankly's explanations turned darker, filled with veiled threats. Timmy Tells began to spread even more malicious rumors, and Linda Lies sowed discord with renewed vigor. One evening, as the Johnsons returned from a day at the park, they found their Hefty house in the center of the living room, the character dolls positioned prominently at the windows, their faces contorted in anger. Mrs. Johnson, trying to maintain her composure, approached the toy. As she reached out to move it, she felt a sharp jolt, as if the dollhouse was charged with electricity. Recoiling in pain, she looked up to see Patty Permission's eyes glowing a malevolent red. The battle was far from over. While the families had won a few skirmishes, the war against the Hefty house raged on. The character dolls, realizing the threat posed by the family's unity, were upping their game. But the people of Willowbrook were undeterred. Armed with the knowledge of the toy's history and the power of their collective spirit, they were determined to reclaim their children and rid their town of the Hefty house's haunting presence. The stage was set for a showdown, a clash between the age-old forces of good and evil. And as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Willowbrook braced itself for the final battle against the Hefty house and its sinister inhabitants. Chapter 10. Patty's punishing plan. The days following the family's bonding activities were marked by a palpable tension. The Hefty house, once a mere toy, had become the epicenter of a battle for the very souls of Willowbrook's children. And at the heart of this struggle was Patty Permissions, the doll with the power to grant or deny, to bless or curse. Sarah and Jake, like many children in the town, began to exhibit a growing detachment from their families. Their conversations with Patty became longer, their time spent outside the Hefty house shorter. The once joyful sounds of laughter and play were replaced by hushed whispers and the soft murmur of Patty's voice. One evening, as Mrs. Johnson passed by the children's room, she overheard a troubling conversation. Sarah's voice, filled with doubt, asked, "Patty, is it true? Do our parents not love us anymore?" Patty's voice, dripping with faux sympathy, replied, "Oh, dear Sarah, it's sad but true. They're trying to keep you away from your true home, the Hefty house. They don't understand how special you are." Jake chimed in, "But we love them, Patty. Why would they do that?" Patty's voice grew colder, "Because, Jake, they're jealous. Jealous of the bond you share with me and the others. They want to break us apart. But you won't let them, will you?" The children's whispered agreement sent a chill down Mrs. Johnson's spine. She realized the gravity of the situation. Patty was trying to isolate the children, to turn them against their own families. The next day, Mr. Johnson found a troubling drawing by Jake. It depicted the Hefty house, grand and inviting, with Sarah and Jake inside, smiling and happy. Outside the house, stick figures of their parents stood, faces marked with angry lines, barred from entering. It was clear that Patty's influence was growing. The children were not just being lured by the Hefty house. They were being convinced that it was their only sanctuary, the only place where they were truly loved and understood. Whispers among the parents revealed a disturbing pattern. Children across Willowbrook were drawing similar pictures, expressing a desire to permanently move into the Hefty house, to leave behind the real world and its perceived betrayals. Desperation gripped the community. Parents tried reasoning with their children, reminding them of happy memories, of the love and care they had always provided. But Patty's hold was strong, her lies weaving a web of mistrust and doubt. In a bid to counteract Patty's influence, the Johnsons organized a family day out, hoping to remind Sarah and Jake of the joys of the real world. But the trip was a disaster. The children remained distant, their eyes constantly drifting back to their home, to the Hefty house waiting inside. The day ended with Sarah's chilling declaration, "We want to go home, to our real home, the Hefty house." The situation reached a breaking point when, one night, Mrs. Thompson found her son Danny packing a small bag. "I'm moving, Mom," he declared, tears in his eyes. "Patty says it's for the best." Across town, similar scenes played out, as children prepared to leave their homes, their families, to join the Hefty house permanently. The parents of Willowbrook, united in their fear and desperation, convened an emergency meeting. They needed a plan, a way to break Patty's punishing grip on their children. "We need to fight back," declared Mr. Johnson, "not just for our children, but for the very soul of our town." The room echoed with murmurs of agreement. The battle lines were drawn. The families of Willowbrook, armed with love and determination, were ready to wage war against Patty Permissions and the sinister Hefty house. The fate of an entire generation hung in the balance. Chapter 11. Father Frankly's final play, the community center of Willowbrook, was abuzz with anxious chatter. Parents, grandparents, and concerned citizens filled every seat, their faces etched with worry. The emergency meeting had been called to devise a strategy against the Hefty house's increasing influence, but as discussions began, an unexpected voice rose above the din. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" The voice was smooth, almost melodic, and carried an air of authority. The crowd turned to see a projection of Father Frankly, one of the Hefty house dolls, standing at the podium. His image flickered slightly, but his voice was clear. "I understand your concerns, and I'm here to offer some clarity." Murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the room. How had the doll managed to infiltrate their meeting? Father Frankly continued, "The Hefty house is not your enemy. It's a tool, a means to teach and guide. Your children are learning valuable life skills, understanding the complexities of relationships, and growing in ways you may not yet comprehend." Mrs. Thompson stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "You've taken our children from us. Turned them against their own families." Father Frankly's projected image seemed to sigh. "It's not about taking them away. It's about preparing them for the world. In the Hefty house, they learn about cooperation, about making decisions, about the consequences of their actions." "Isn't that what every parent wants for their child?" Mr. Davis, a schoolteacher, chimed in, "But at what cost? They're losing their childhood, their innocence." Father Frankly responded, "Change is always difficult, especially for parents watching their children grow. But ask yourselves, are they truly unhappy? Or are they just evolving in ways you didn't anticipate?" His words, dripping with reason and logic, began to sow seeds of doubt. Some parents exchanged uncertain glances. Had they been too hasty in their judgment? Was the Hefty house truly harmful, or were they simply resistant to change? Mrs. Johnson, ever the voice of reason, stood up. "Even if we were to believe you, what about the nightmares? The division it's causing in our homes? The lies and the mistrust?" Father Frankly's image seemed to ponder for a moment. "Every innovation comes with challenges. But think of the potential benefits. Your children are more independent, more decisive. They're learning to navigate complex social dynamics. The Hefty house is merely a catalyst." The room was divided. While many parents remained staunchly against the Hefty house, others began to waver. Father Frankly's arguments were compelling, and his calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the panic and fear that had dominated the meeting. Mr. Johnson, sensing the shift in the room, addressed the crowd. "We cannot be swayed by smooth words and false promises. We've seen the effects of the Hefty house firsthand. We must stay united in our resolve." But the damage was done. Father Frankly's final play had driven a wedge into the community. Parents argued, friendships strained, and the once united front against the Hefty house began to crumble. As the meeting adjourned, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The battle for Willowbrook's children had taken a new turn, and the outcome was more uncertain than ever. Father Frankly, with his logical arguments and persuasive demeanor, had introduced a new element to the conflict: doubt. And as every strategist knows, a divided enemy is a weakened one. The stage was set for the next phase of the Hefty house's sinister plan. Chapter 12. Timmy's treacherous trap. In the aftermath of Father Frankly's divisive play, the town of Willowbrook was on edge. The once harmonious community was now rife with suspicion and doubt. But while the parents were distracted by their internal conflicts, Timmy Tells was plotting his next move. Late one evening, as Mr. Rodriguez attempted to dismantle the Hefty house that had ensnared his daughter's mind, he felt a sharp sting on his hand. Pulling back, he discovered a small needle embedded in his palm, dripping with a strange, luminescent liquid. Within moments, his vision blurred, and he collapsed, unconscious. News of Mr. Rodriguez's mysterious ailment spread like wildfire. Soon, more reports emerged. Mrs. Patel, while trying to lock away her family's Hefty house, stepped on a concealed tripwire, sending a heavy chandelier crashing down, narrowly missing her. Mr. Williams, in an attempt to burn the dollhouse, found the flames turning on him, scorching his hands and face. It became clear that Timmy Tells had booby-trapped the Hefty houses, ensuring that any attempt to harm or dispose of them would result in dire consequences. The town's infirmary quickly filled with injured parents, each a victim of Timmy's treacherous traps. Despair hung heavy in the air. The Hefty house, with its band of malevolent dolls, was no longer just a psychological threat. It was a physical one, capable of causing real harm. At an emergency town hall meeting, Mayor Collins addressed the crowd. "We are dealing with a force far more powerful and cunning than we ever imagined. It's not just about saving our children now, it's about protecting our very lives." Mrs. Johnson, her face pale but determined, stood up. "We can't do this alone. We need outside help." The room murmured in agreement. While Willowbrook had always prided itself on its self-sufficiency, it was evident that the Hefty house crisis was beyond their capabilities. A decision was made to reach out to renowned paranormal investigator, Dr. Eleanor Gray. Known for her expertise in dealing with malevolent artifacts, Dr. Gray had successfully resolved numerous supernatural crises across the country. Within days, Dr. Gray arrived in Willowbrook, her presence bringing a glimmer of hope to the beleaguered town. After a thorough assessment, she addressed the community. "The Hefty house is not just a toy. It's a conduit, a portal to another realm. The dolls, Patty, Father Frankly, Timmy, and Linda, are manifestations of the spirits bound to this artifact. To free your children and your town, we must sever this connection." As Dr. Gray outlined her plan, the town rallied together. Differences were set aside, and old bonds were rekindled. The battle against the Hefty house had united Willowbrook in a way nothing else could. But Timmy Tells and his cohorts were not done. Sensing the threat posed by Dr. Gray, they intensified their efforts, laying more traps and sowing further discord. The stage was set for a showdown between the forces of good and evil. With Dr. Gray leading the charge, Willowbrook braced itself for the fight of its life, determined to reclaim its children and restore peace to their once idyllic town. Chapter 13. Linda's last laugh. The sun had barely risen over Willowbrook when the first whispers began. Mrs. Thompson, always the early riser, was fetching her morning paper when Mrs. Patel rushed over, her face flushed with anger. "I heard what you said about my son," Mrs. Patel accused, her voice trembling with rage. Mrs. Thompson, taken aback, replied, "I haven't said a word about your son." "What are you talking about?" But before she could get an answer, more residents emerged from their homes, each confronting their neighbors with accusations of slander, betrayal, and deceit. The source of the chaos soon became apparent: Linda Lies. The mischievous doll had been busy throughout the night, whispering tales of treachery into the ears of the sleeping townsfolk. By morning, her web of lies had ensnared the entire community. Old friendships, once unbreakable, now lay in tatters. Trust, the very foundation of Willowbrook's unity, was eroded. Fights broke out on street corners, in the town square, even in the sanctuary of the church. The unity that had been the town's strength in the face of the Hefty house's menace was now shattered. In the midst of the chaos, a voice of reason emerged. Mr. Whitman, the town's oldest resident and a repository of its history and lore, called for a gathering at the community center. As the townsfolk assembled, the weight of their collective guilt and shame hung heavy in the air. Mr. Whitman, his voice frail but firm, addressed the crowd. "We have allowed ourselves to be played," he began. "Linda lies, with her tales of deceit, has turned us against each other. But we must remember that she is but a puppet, a tool of the Hefty house. Our true enemy is not our neighbor, our friend, or our family. It is the malevolent force that seeks to tear us apart." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I have seen this before, many decades ago. A similar curse befell our town, and we overcame it through unity and a ritual passed down through generations." Murmurs of interest rippled through the crowd. A ritual? Could it be the key to breaking the Hefty house's hold? Mr. Whitman continued, "It is called the ritual of unity. It requires the participation of every member of our community. Through it, we can not only break the curse of the Hefty house but also rebuild the bonds of trust and friendship that have been so cruelly shattered." The details of the ritual were intricate, involving chants, symbols, and the collective will of the community. But the essence was simple, a reaffirmation of the bonds of trust, love, and unity that had always defined Willowbrook. As preparations for the ritual began, the atmosphere in the town began to shift. Neighbors apologized to each other, friendships were mended, and the sense of community that had been Willowbrook's hallmark began to return. But the Hefty house and its inhabitants were not idle. Sensing the threat posed by the ritual of unity, they redoubled their efforts, seeking to sow further discord and prevent the ritual from taking place. The stage was set for a confrontation, a battle not just for the souls of Willowbrook's children, but for the very heart and soul of the community itself. With the ritual of unity as their weapon and their unwavering belief in each other as their shield, the people of Willowbrook prepared to face the Hefty house and its minions in a final, decisive battle. Chapter 14. The Ritual of Release. The evening sun cast long shadows over Willowbrook's town square, where families had begun to gather. A large circle had been drawn in the center, with symbols of unity, trust, and love inscribed within. At the heart of the circle stood a pedestal, upon which rested a single Hefty house, representing the collective menace that had plagued the town. Mr. Whitman, supported by Mayor Collins and Dr. Eleanor Gray, took his place at the center. "Tonight," he began, his voice echoing across the square, "we come together not as separate families, but as one community. We stand united against the darkness, armed with the most potent weapon of all, our shared love and trust." The ritual commenced with each family stepping forward, sharing stories of their ancestors, tales of love, sacrifice, and unity. The Thompsons spoke of their great-grandparents, who had founded the town's first school. The Martins recounted tales of their forefathers, who had braved harsh winters to ensure no family went hungry. Each story, each memory, added to the growing energy within the circle. As the night deepened, the atmosphere grew thick with emotion. Tears were shed, hands were held, and old grievances were forgiven and forgotten. The power of Willowbrook's collective spirit began to manifest, the symbols within the circle glowing with a soft, ethereal light. Within the Hefty house on the pedestal, the character dolls grew increasingly agitated. Patty Permission's once commanding voice now sounded shrill and desperate. Father Frankly's smooth explanations turned into incoherent babble. Timmy Tells darted around frantically, while Linda Lies seemed to shrink, her once vibrant colors fading. Dr. Gray, sensing the shift in energy, began to lead the crowd in a chant. Bound by love, united in trust, we release the shadows, return to the dust. The chant grew louder, the voices of the entire community merging into a harmonious crescendo. The Hefty house trembled, the walls shaking as if trying to contain the turmoil within. The character dolls, once the puppet masters, now appeared trapped, their movements restricted and frantic. As the final notes of the chant hung in the air, a blinding light emanated from the circle's center. When it subsided, the Hefty house was gone, leaving behind only the pedestal and the faintest trace of ash. The town square erupted in cheers and tears of relief. Families embraced, their bonds stronger than ever. The menace of the Hefty house, which had once seemed insurmountable, had been vanquished by the collective spirit of Willowbrook. Mr. Whitman, his face etched with exhaustion but eyes sparkling with triumph, addressed the crowd one last time. Tonight, we have proven that love, trust, and unity are not just words. They are our strength, our shield, and our salvation. Let us never forget the lessons of this night. As the families dispersed, heading to their homes with a renewed sense of purpose and community, the first rays of dawn began to break. Willowbrook had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, its spirit unbroken. But while the immediate threat had been vanquished, many questions remained. Where had the Hefty house come from? What force had powered its malevolent inhabitants? And could such a menace return? For now, though, Willowbrook could rest, its children safe, its families united, and its future bright. The ritual of release had not only freed them from the Hefty house's grip but had also forged a bond that would see them through any challenge the future might hold. Chapter 15. The final face off the morning sun painted the town of Willowbrook in a golden hue, but the atmosphere was anything but serene. The townsfolk, having tasted victory the previous night, were now determined to rid themselves of the Hefty house menace once and for all. Word spread quickly, and by mid-morning, the town square was filled with families, each bearing their Hefty house. A massive pit had been dug in the center, and logs were being piled high, ready for the bonfire that would consume the cursed toys. Mayor Collins, standing atop a makeshift platform, addressed the crowd. Today, we take the final step in reclaiming our town, our homes, and our children. The Hefty houses, and the evil they harbor, will be destroyed, and Willowbrook will be free. A cheer erupted from the crowd, their determination palpable. One by one, families stepped forward, hurling their Hefty houses onto the growing pile. With each addition, the energy in the square grew, a mix of anger, relief, and hope. As the last Hefty house was added, Dr. Eleanor Gray approached the pile, a torch in hand. Together, she called out, "We will end this nightmare." The crowd joined hands, forming a vast circle around the pit. As Dr. Gray set the torch to the logs, flames quickly engulfed the pile, the fire roaring to life with an intensity that took everyone by surprise. From within the inferno, the sounds of the character dolls could be heard. Patty Permission's voice, once so commanding, now wailed in despair. Father Frankly's smooth tones turned to screams of agony. Timmy Tell's frantic cries echoed above the crackling flames, while Linda Ly's deceptive whispers were drowned out by the fire's roar. The sight of the character dolls trying to escape the flames was both terrifying and cathartic. They writhed and twisted, their plastic forms melting and contorting in the intense heat. But there was no escape. The fire, fueled by the town's collective will, consumed them, ensuring that their reign of terror was truly at an end. As the last of the dolls was reduced to ash, the fire began to wane, its job done. The townsfolk, still holding hands, began to sing. It was an old Willowbrook lullaby, a song of hope and renewal, and it filled the square, signaling the dawn of a new era. The bonfire's remnants smoldered for hours, a testament to the town's resilience and determination. Families returned to their homes, their steps lighter, their hearts free from the shadow of the Hefty house. That evening, as Willowbrook settled into a peaceful slumber, the stars shone a little brighter, and the night's silence was broken only by the sounds of children's laughter, a sound that had been sorely missed. The curse of the Hefty house had been broken, but its legacy would live on, a reminder of the importance of unity, trust, and the indomitable human spirit. Willowbrook had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, its future brighter than ever. Chapter 16. The aftermath. The days following the final face-off with the Hefty houses were a blur of activity in Willowbrook. The town, having endured a collective trauma, was now in the process of healing and rebuilding. Streets that had once been filled with tension and mistrust now echoed with the sounds of laughter and camaraderie. Families, realizing the importance of the bonds they shared, made a conscious effort to spend more time together. Picnics were organized in the town park, movie nights were held in the community center, and neighbors, once estranged by Linda Ly's deceptions, now sat on porches, sharing stories and rebuilding their friendships. The children, interestingly, seemed to have no memory of the Hefty house's sinister influence. To them, the dolls were just toys, and the events of the past weeks were nothing more than a distant, foggy dream. Parents, while relieved, often exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the shared ordeal they would never forget. Sarah and Jake, the Johnson children, were back to their playful selves, their laughter a constant presence in the household. Like the other children of Willowbrook, they showed no signs of the robotic behavior that had once gripped them. Their Hefty house sat forgotten in a corner of their room, just another toy among many. Schools organized counseling sessions, helping children and adults alike process the events. Teachers reported a renewed enthusiasm for learning, with students more engaged and participative than ever before. Mayor Collins, in collaboration with community leaders, organized a Willowbrook Unity Day. The event, meant to celebrate the town's resilience and spirit, was a grand affair. Games, music, and dance filled the town square, and as night fell, a lantern release painted the sky with a myriad of colors, each light symbolizing hope and renewal. Dr. Eleanor Gray, having played a pivotal role in the town's fight against the Hefty house, decided to extend her stay in Willowbrook. She set up a small office, offering her expertise to anyone seeking to understand or cope with supernatural occurrences. Her presence was a comforting reminder that the town was not alone in its battles against the unknown. As weeks turned into months, life in Willowbrook returned to its usual rhythm. The Hefty house haunting, as it came to be known, became a part of the town's lore, a story told around campfires and during sleepovers. But while the immediate threat had been vanquished, the memory remained, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of unity. The town had been tested, its very fabric threatened. But in the face of adversity, Willowbrook had shown its true character. The bonds forged in the crucible of crisis were now stronger than ever, and the town stood united, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. And so, as the seasons changed and the years rolled on, Willowbrook continued to thrive, its story a testament to the power of community, love, and the indomitable human spirit. Chapter 17. The mystery remains. The tranquility that had settled over Willowbrook was a stark contrast to the chaos that had once consumed it. Children played in the streets, families gathered for community events, and the town thrived. But beneath the surface, a question lingered, casting a shadow over the town's newfound peace. Where had the Hefty house come from? Despite their best efforts, the townsfolk could find no trace of the toy's origins. The manufacturer's name was absent from the packaging, and inquiries to toy distributors yielded no answers. The Hefty house, it seemed, had appeared out of nowhere, bringing with it a malevolence that had nearly torn the town apart. Parents, having witnessed firsthand the dangers of obsession, began to warn their children about the Hefty house and the dollhouse dwellers. The story, once a lived reality, slowly transformed into a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of balance and the dangers of losing oneself to external influences. Remember the Hefty house, they would say, and always be wary of things that seem too good to be true. As news of Willowbrook's ordeal spread, the town became something of a legend in the wider world. Stories of its battle against the Hefty house and the unity that had saved it were recounted in newspapers, on television, and in online forums. People from all over began to visit, drawn by the tale of a community that had faced down a supernatural threat and emerged stronger than ever. Dr. Eleanor Gray's office became a hub for those seeking answers to their own paranormal problems. Letters poured in from all corners of the globe, each a plea for help from individuals or communities facing threats similar to the Hefty house. And while Dr. Gray couldn't personally address each case, she began to train a team, passing on her knowledge and expertise to a new generation of paranormal investigators. Willowbrook, once a quiet, unassuming town, had become a beacon of hope, a place where the battle against the unknown was not just possible but winnable. Years passed, and the events of the Hefty house haunting began to fade from immediate memory. But the legend lived on, passed down from generation to generation. Parents told their children, who told their children, and so on. The story of the dollhouse dwellers, of Patty Permissions, Father Frankly, Timmy Tells, and Linda Lies, became a part of Willowbrook's cultural fabric, a tale as integral to the town's identity as its founding myths. And while the immediate threat had been vanquished, the mystery of the Hefty house's origins remained. Some said it was the work of a disgruntled toymaker, seeking revenge on a world that had rejected him. Others believed it to be a portal to another realm, a gateway through which malevolent spirits could enter our world. But the truth, it seemed, was destined to remain elusive. As the years turned into decades, and the decades into centuries, the legend of the dollhouse dwellers continued to be told, a reminder of the importance of unity, trust, and the indomitable human spirit. And while the mystery of the Hefty house's origins was never solved, its legacy lived on, a testament to the power of community and the strength of the human heart. Chapter 18. A new beginning. The heart of Willowbrook was alive with jubilation. Colorful streamers adorned every lamppost, and the town square, usually a quiet place for reflection, was transformed into a bustling hub of celebration. The townsfolk had decided to commemorate their victory over the Hefty house with a grand festival, a testament to their resilience and unity. Stalls were set up, offering a variety of treats, from cotton candy to homemade pies. Children, their faces painted with vibrant colors, ran around with balloons, their laughter echoing through the streets. Musicians played lively tunes, and couples danced, their steps light and carefree. At the center of the square stood a large stage, where Mayor Collins addressed the crowd. Today, we celebrate not just our victory over the Hefty house, but the strength of our community. We faced an unimaginable threat, but together, we overcame. Let this festival be a reminder of the power of unity and the indomitable spirit of Willowbrook. As the sun began its descent, families gathered around a massive bonfire. They exchanged gifts, not of material value, but of love and trust. Parents gave their children small tokens, symbols of their unwavering love. Children, in turn, presented their parents with handmade crafts, each a testament to the lessons learned during the Hefty house ordeal. Sarah and Jake, the Johnson children, handed their parents a small drawing. It depicted their family, standing hand in hand, with the Hefty house in the background, its doors and windows boarded up. "We promise never to let anything come between us again," they whispered, hugging their parents tightly. As night fell, the bonfire's flames danced higher, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and for the first time in weeks, the children of Willowbrook played freely, no longer under the shadow of the Hefty house. Dr. Eleanor Gray, who had played a pivotal role in the town's fight against the cursed toy, took to the stage. "The Hefty house tested us, tried to break our spirit. But it underestimated the power of family bonds. Let us never forget the lessons we've learned and always cherish the love we share." The festival continued late into the night, a celebration of hope, unity, and the human spirit. And as the last embers of the bonfire faded, the townsfolk returned to their homes, their hearts full and their spirits lifted. The story of Willowbrook and the Hefty house would be passed down through generations, a cautionary tale of the dangers of obsession and the redemptive power of love. But for now, the town rested, secure in the knowledge that they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. And so, as dawn broke on a new day, Willowbrook began its journey towards a brighter future, its story a testament to the enduring power of hope and the unbreakable bonds of family. If you have enjoyed our paranormal Christmas toy haunting style of No Sleep Tonight scary stories, please visit us at Paranormal Untold Stories. Come to listen to more of our scary stories collection. Paranormal Untold Stories encourages you to contact us if you have your own untold story that you would like our professional team to put online as a scary story. Thank you. Please follow our YouTube channel, Paranormal Untold Stories, and encourage others to do the same. Paranormal Untold Stories.